Hello everyone. Welcome to MACKMYRA Swedish Whiskies Christmas virtual tasting. I'm your host for the evening, Brand Ambassador for the UK, one of them, Richard McKeand. Any of our regular joiners, attendees, probably a better word, notice that my colleague Mickey is not here this evening. Mickey is taking a well-deserved bit of annual leave over the Christmas break, time to spend some time with his family, and I've been left to do this on my own, which is a first time for me, doing a virtual tasting on my own that isn't on Zoom, where I can't see people looking back at me and facial reactions to things. So I will politely ask or encourage anybody that is watching from home, please, as we go through, do feel very free to comment and ask questions as we go. It will stop this from being a monologue and me just firing information at everybody for the next hour or so. So please do. Birthday shout outs, whatever it is, give us a message, let us know. Anyone that hasn't joined us before, welcome, and everyone that has joined before, welcome as well. The way things are going to work this evening, we'll go through the 5 whiskies that you've been sent in your pack. We'll go through them one by one, of course. We'll talk about the whiskies in turn. Here we go, a lovely picture there. Thank you. I do have Carl in the background, so Carl, the regular tech man, producer, I think a more generous term, in the background there. So thank you, Carl, for being here again. We'll talk about each whiskey in turn, a little bit of some tasting notes, some history about the distillery. We'll expand with each whiskey and cask recipes and everything like that, and talk about some tips maybe on how to nose and taste the whiskey as we go through. The running order for this evening, for anyone that might have multiple glasses out in front of them, we're going to start more or less the order of the box that you've got. So we're going to go Mac, Brooks Whiskey, Svensk Ek, and then we're going to put Stjärnrök as number 4, and then finish on Svensk as number 5. Please have I'd recommend at least to have a glass of water on hand, just to keep yourself hydrated and to cleanse the palate to a degree between each whiskey that you have. And if you've got a pipette or a straw or a tiny little jug or something, or a bottle, a water bottle cap, anything that you can just use to get a few drops of water into your drams as we go, just to experiment and see how you feel once you've added a bit of water to it as well, should you so wish. I would advise to refrain from pouring the entire double measure in each time. Pour a little bit in, however much you feel is appropriate for you, and then hang on to the rest to revisit it later and come back to it and see what you think with sort of less. We're going from one whiskey to the next time frame in mind, perhaps just sort of sit back and if you've got some left at the end, enjoy in your own time and sort of see how you think, and let it sit and percolate in the glass for a little bit. And as I said, please do comment from home. Any questions that you have, not just for my benefit to keep me company, but anything that you do want to know, please pop it in the chat. And hello, Rafat. Lovely. Really tempting. Oh, well, excellent restraint there, I would say, because quite often we send these packs out to people and then we get a message a few days before saying, any chance of ordering another one? I've run out, so excellent work there, I would say. I think that's probably enough of a preamble. What I'll do is I'll give everyone not a whistle-stop tour, but a brief introduction into sort of MACKMYRA, who we are, the distillery, some of the background to it, how it all came about, what our sort of founding principles and way of operating are and then we'll move into the whiskey. So I say, if nobody's heard of MACKMYRA before, we are Shilton in the house. Thank you very much, Shilton, for your patronage again. MACKMYRA is Sweden's first single malt whiskey distillery. There was a distillery in Sweden sometime in the 60s, 70s, made a mixture of grains and malts, but no single malts released. So we are, having started in 1999, Sweden's first. A big appetite for whiskey in Sweden. More whiskey clubs per capita there than any other country around, as of at least last year, with everything popping up over lockdown, lots of clubs starting. We're interested to see what those statistics are now. But nevertheless, a huge appetite for whiskey over there, but no one actually making it. So in '98, our 8 founding members were all on a skiing holiday together, something that they did a few years in a row. And this fateful year, everyone happened to bring along, here's 3 of them pictured here, on the very year where the idea was formed. They all happened to bring along some bottles of whiskey, of scotch, of various things, not planned, just happened. And then at some point, during the holiday, however far down they got through the bottle, somebody said, or asked the question, why is nobody making whiskey in Sweden? At that point, Scotland and Ireland, fewer distilleries there, of course, but they'd been making whiskey for a very long time and were quite a bit famous for it. America had their bourbon. Japan had been making whiskey for the better part of 80 years, I think, at that point. So there were people making whiskey in other countries other than the big famous ones, but nobody making it in Sweden at the time. I think now there's probably half a dozen or so or more that you can find here and there. But we were the first and the original. So 98, the idea was had. They set about going to work out how to make whiskey to begin with. Travelled Scotland, got lots of advice from lots of people, got all of their permits from the Swedish government. And then in December of 1999, the first spirit was distilled in Sweden, the spirit that would then become whiskey a few years later, once it had its obvious, its time in a cask and become whiskey. The 8 founders that we had, all been friends at university. There were no brewers, no distillers amongst them, so they really had to learn everything from the ground up. So the first 2 or 3 years was spent experimenting with things in a tiny 100-litre handmade that they'd welded themselves, handmade still, experimenting with. Here we go, perfect picture there. That is still quite an odd shape. They'd had taken measurements and dimensions from a still that they found in a Swedish agricultural museum, and then set about making their own. So the first few years, as I said, just looking at different barley types and how long they were going to run the stills for and at what temperature and everything it would be, and just sort of seeing, learning the trade and as they went. The 3 founding principles that we had from the very beginning and that still run through the company to this day, whether where we're talking in the UK, talking in Germany, in France, in Australia, wherever it would be, Swedishness, which is a word I'm sure it will do for this evening, but Swedishness. They wanted it to be as Swedish, everything to be as Swedish as possible. Innovation and sustainability. So Swedishness, innovation, sustainability, which I would say, if anybody knows any Swedish people or Scandinavians, the 3 of those sort of feed into one another. Lots of sort of a sustainability focused nation, I would say, and that looking at innovation and things as well. So being Swedish, all of our ingredients are from Sweden. We are one of fewer than 12 distilleries in the world who malt and peat their own barley on site themselves, because we couldn't get any peated barley from maltsters in Sweden at the time, and I think still to this day, nobody's peating any malt in Sweden. So rather than import it in from elsewhere, or import, peat or barley or peated barley, whatever it would be, they decided that they wanted to do it themselves, because being the first, they wanted to make sure everything was as Swedish as it can be. And I will expand more on that as we go through. Innovation, we're able to use all sorts of different cask types that you can't use elsewhere. So we do, I wouldn't say push the boundary necessarily, but to a degree we probably do, using lots of different types of casks. And by types of casks, I mean casks that have had different types of wines or spirits in before that you won't commonly see whiskey being bottled as, this type of finish or that type of finish. And again, we'll talk a bit more about that, especially when we get through to some of the more the seasonal whiskey that we have at Stjärnrök. And then sustainability. So in sustainability, we've got this big gravity distillery I'll tell you about when we get to Mac, which we're racing towards now. We use 45% less energy than a traditional distillery would do, and then all sorts of little things and little details from top to bottom throughout the company where sustainability is a huge focus for us. We've been in 3 different locations. So the first were really sort of a series of little locations, pilot distillery and various founders' gardens and sheds, moving from one thing to the next, especially with the peating. When neighbours complained about the smell or the noises and things coming around. 2001, 2002, we moved into the Brooks Distillery, where Whiskey 2 of this evening takes its name. Pictured here, the white building in the foreground, red building behind, stables, situated on a little river island, about an hour and a half north of Stockholm, where MACKMYRA actually is. It's not just us trying to sound Scottish. It is an actual place in Sweden where one of the founders was from, and we can see here beautifully illustrated there. So where the white arrow is pointing towards the A of Gävle is where the original distillery was, Brooks Distillery, and then where the red dot, the classic Google Maps dot, is where the new distillery is, about 15, 20 kilometers away or so. 2011 we moved into the Gravity Distillery. We'll talk a bit more about that when we get to Mac. So they're the 3 places we've been, and we will be in this Gravity Distillery hopefully forever, because it is something of a marvel, I would say, and it is a fascinating subject. Warehouses all over Sweden. So most of our stock, about 95 or 99% even, is matured 50 meters underground in the Budas mines. An old disused iron ore mine. The shafts go down a good 400 or 500 meters. We use a bit just sort of off to the side of it, nearer the top. It's only 50 meters underground. These huge cavernous rooms filled with casks of whiskey maturing away, keeping it out of the spit of Swedish cold, and a very interesting place to visit, if should anyone ever be so lucky to be over there. And then lots of other little satellite warehouses around. My two favourite to talk about. One is on top of a mountain. Lofsdalen, it's a good few hours away from the distillery, but it means if you get to the top of this mountain, good 3,500 feet up, I think it is, there's a sky lounge, a big bar, well, not bar big at all actually, but a circular sky lounge where you can have a coffee and a cake, and then underneath it is a small circular warehouse filled with 30-litre casks. And the other one, that's Lofsdalen there. So you can see, the clouds obviously, preventing you from seeing the floor, but that's how high up you are, which I think would be a wonderful place to go and see. And then any Swedes we have watching, please forgive my pronunciation, but Fjörholmarna is a little island in the archipelago that is Stockholm, the city itself. And this island here that we can see, the larger one nearer the front left here, the huge rock on the bit of the island closest to us was hollowed out by the Swedish Navy some decades ago, and used to store torpedoes and munitions for the Swedish Navy. And the island itself was a point of defence, during times of war. And now you can go over there. There's a little brewery there. There's a restaurant. There's all sorts of things to do, little craft shops, and then a hollowed out rock that used to store torpedoes that now has a few hundred 30-litre and several 200-litre casks of ours maturing away. So so they're some of the if you will, colder warehouses to talk about. We've got 3 ranges, 3 key ranges at least, 2 of which we're trying this evening. So the core range, which constitutes everything that you've got in your display box, and then the seasonal range, where we have a limited edition comes out. One will be a spring summer seasonal release, one will be an autumn winter seasonal release. It could be 10, 15,000, 15,000 or so bottles of each, so not highly limited in their number, but that stock's got to go all around the world, to everywhere that we sell to, and all the markets that we're in. And once it's gone, it's gone basically, and it's not coming back. So not particularly limited in its initial number, but limited in the sense that it's not coming back again. And Stjärnrök is this year's autumn winter release, so this came out in September of this year. And then we had the Moment collection, where a very small batch, could be anywhere from 2,000 or 1,000 to 4,000 in number, where Angela, who I'll talk about in a moment, our master blender, has selected some of the best examples of what casks we expect our casks to be, and then puts them into certain small batch releases. And then there'll be twists on things here and there, where we either work with other brands, for rum companies, and use some of their casks, for example, or champagne and Swedish celebrities actually as well. And Angela Dorazio, I'll just mention there, this is the last thing I'll touch on before we get stuck into the Mac. If you haven't already poured a little glass of Mac, please do now. Angela Dorazio is the person who created all of the whiskey that we have in front of us this evening, and since we started, every release that we've had has had either her influence. The first 2 she consulted on, but then every subsequent release after that has been her creation. Chief Nose Officer was her official title, and master blender being a more familiar thing, I think, for people. The person who decides what recipes and what percentages of which casks are going to be put together to get the profile and the flavor characteristics that she wants to achieve from it. I think that's probably in as much of a nutshell as I can do. So on that note, I'll say let's get some Mac on the go. Here we go. excuse me, so I can't multitask, so I have to pause as I pour a glass for myself. So Mac is I've always felt bad saying like the entry level into our range. Effectively, that is what it is, but I think it's a damn good whiskey. In spite of any of that sort of description for it. So 40% ABV. You'll find this in the mid to high 30s into pounds and pence. American oak casks are the only cask that we've used for maturing this, which is not incredibly unusual for us, but rather unusual in that we often use quite a large-ish at least number of casks to try and create a flavor profile at the end. But whereas with this, we've only used American oak casks, a mixture of virgin oak and first fill American oak casks. So please do fire in any notes or tasting notes, flavors, anything that people are picking up. But with this, we quite often find people the more common ones might be caramel, vanilla, pear, pear fudge every so often, maybe a bit of apple, bit of baked green apple, perhaps a little bit of fresh red apple, perhaps. Yeah, which I'm definitely getting a bit of now. And yeah, while everyone has a little nose and a little taste of that, I'll tell you a little bit about Mac and some of the background to it for anyone that would care to listen. Mac is the first whiskey that we've released that was distilled entirely at the Gravity Distillery. So I mentioned the Gravity Distillery is our forever home now. We can see it here pictured on the left, hiding behind that very skinny tree, but we can see it there. That's the front of the distillery we were looking at. So 35 meters tall. 7 stories. The top story, if you can make out the sort of balcony looking part on the very top, that's where our tasting room is. So should anyone ever get over to Sweden to go and do a tour of the distillery, you start at the very top, you work your way down floor to floor, and then you get the lift all the way back up to have a tasting overlooking the forests to the west of Gävle on the Swedish east coast. So the tasting room up at the top, then floor 6 is where our barley, which is pictured. Carl might be able to find a picture of the back of the distillery, hopefully, Carl, please, with 2 big green silos. One is filled with peated barley, one is filled with elegant barley, we call it, so unpeated. And a grain elevator in between the two that takes up barley to floor 6 of 7. Where the process begins, basically. So I think sieving, making sure that metals and things are taken out of it so that it doesn't go through, and any undesirable stones, etc. Sieving, then you've got milling, mashing, fermentation, distillation, and then a new make spirit store at the bottom, and Angela's lab, her laboratory, where she makes all of her concoctions and tries different things out. Oh, perfect. Here we go. So there's a cross section of the distillery there. So you can see at the top the people enjoying the a drink and standing on the balcony at the Sky Bar, and then the green silos there you can see on the left, where the barley will come up to the very top and then work its way down. Big benefits of having what we call it the Gravity Distillery, but it's a vertical distillery. We use far less energy creating our whiskey than a traditional distillery would do. A traditional distillery being something that would produce things in a horizontal fashion, using a fair amount of energy, pumping things from one stage to the next in a horizontal manner, whereas we take our barley to the top and then allow gravity to do the hard work when moving product and whatever stage it is from one stage to the next. In addition to gravity, there's all sorts of geeky bits of technology, and I say geeky with the greatest amount of affection possible. We have our own power plant off to the side of the distillery that is fueled by bio pellets, biofuel. So a natural and a sustainable power source off to the side. The various points of the production process, so mashing, for example, when you're making a big sort of a porridge, we're activating starches and converting them into sugars so that we can then during fermentation add yeast and turn those sugars into alcohol. But during the mashing part, You have to fill it a couple of times with some rather warm water, and then that energy would ordinarily, from a normal distillery, be wasted and go off and just dissipate out into the world. Whereas we capture as much heat as we can, so any residual and leftover heat from that process is captured in a closed circuit water system that then takes it off and stores it elsewhere. These various big let's call it a room, big heat cupboards or whatever it is, off to the side of the distillery, and then we can decide whether or not that energy and that heat gets sent to, could be the offices to go and heat the offices up, could be to go and help other parts of the production process heat up to give them a little boost. So as almost nothing is lost in terms of energy throughout the entire process. And our draff being the term for your leftover, so the leftover barley, the husks of barley, once you've, as I mentioned a moment ago, you've converted the starches that you have in that malted barley into sugar, and then send that liquid off to go and then go into the fermentation tanks to become your beer, effectively. You have this leftover physical matter called draff that then gets sent off. Quite often gets sent off, if anyone's done any distillery tours, get sent off to local farms to go and feed the cattle or animals that they'd have. I think generally speaking it'd be cattle feed, so it doesn't get really sort of wasted there. Ours gets sent off to become biogas and biofuel again. So it's even though we might not be using that ourselves, so there's it's just a very sustainable way of getting rid of things. I think feeding it to cattle obviously is not going to waste, of course, but with us it gets sent off to become biofuel, eco-friendly fuel, which I think is quite an impressive thing. Or for me, I like that sort of thing, and these details, so I've always found it interesting. Anyone at home care to volunteer any tasting notes? Does anyone find any caramel? Anyone agree that they might find vanilla or pear or any orchard fruits at all? Pear and caramel. So that's Carl in the background there, MACKMYRA Swedish Whiskey UK. Carl, thank you very much. In agreement there, as always. You and I, kindred spirits, of course. Anyone there? Who did we have comment at the beginning? It was Rafa. If you're still with us and you haven't gone through Rafat, maybe, if you haven't finished them all after these weeks of restraint that you've shown, and then scoff them all in 5 minutes at the beginning of this, or 20, however long we've been on, please do let us know whether or not you agree on any of those notes. Otherwise, I'm going to have a little sip myself, and then we might move on to the Brooks whiskey. Skull, say. I do like that. Lovely. Oh, Sebastian, yeah, banana, definitely. So if you can find banana on this, I don't want to impart the power of suggestion or anything sort of too early, but I think you should definitely find it on the Brooks whiskey as well. So some of the most common tasting notes that we find and receive are with things like apples, pears, and then banana, which I think falls more into the tropical fruit category. But yeah, tropical fruits and orchard fruits, you should be able to find one, the other, or both in just about everything that we do. It should sort of be there. It's an important part of the MACKMYRA DNA. Rafa, hello. So yeah, definitely caramel, great, pear, apple, very gentle. I'll take that gentle. I think this is one of the reasons why we like to start with this as well. Is this is probably the most soft profile that we have. So gentle, soft, easy drinking, while still having, I hope, and anyone agree or disagree, please let me know, but a good amount of complexity to it as well. So easy drinking and approachable, whilst still having, not being too plain. There are quite a few things going on in there, and the longer you do sit with this, the more you will get out of it as well, which is why I would encourage everyone, again, not to necessarily pour the entire 50 ml sample that you have. Pour a bit out and save a bit, and then come back to it later and sort of sit and sit with it and spend a bit of time with the whiskey that you have. A couple more come in there. So Niak, that's what I'm going to call you. Excuse me, that's okay. Vanilla, I found orange shell a bit. So orange shell, I think means orange peel, I would say. So like a slightly bitter, earthy type of orange, maybe. That's what I hear anyway when I read that note. And I think I definitely find a bit of orange and orange peel in some of the ones that we have. So when we get to Svensk Ek, whiskey number 3, I often find a little bit of orange peel in there as well. So interesting to see if there's a theme. And you guys have, yeah. That's Rafa again. So yeah, banana is there when you mention it. So that, yeah. So that power of suggestion I was speaking about a moment ago with Sebastian's comment. Yeah, someone will say a tasting note, and you'll go, oh, actually, yeah, I can find that there. And you're never entirely sure if it's because somebody's mentioned it and then it's in there, or if it's because actually your brain was looking for that word and then somebody suggested it and then you got it. But I think either way, if you think you can find it there, even if after somebody has said it too, it exists. And I will say there are absolutely no wrong answers with tasting notes. You don't need to be a master blender or a whiskey expert or anyone like that to feel, or you shouldn't anyway be anyone have to be someone like that to feel as though you're able to share tasting notes and things that you get. There are no wrong answers at all. If you think you can put a word to something, or even a color or a feeling or whatever it is, then it exists in that glass. It's all tasting whiskey, food, wine, gin, whatever it is. It's all so subjective and personal that if you can find something, put a name to it, fantastic. And the more you try and the more you see other people doing it, and you're in a group or you can attend an event or something like this, your vocabulary will grow as well. And being able to put a word to something, it's very helpful to have other people chiming in, I think, and saying so. Thanks so much. And then yeah, James, we've got something from James there agreeing very much on the banana as well. So I think on that note, it's time to move to a Brooks whiskey. So whiskey number 2 of the evening. Here we go. So that is what the 70 centiliter bottle looks like. Here we go. I told you I couldn't talk and pause, so that was that pause there. On that box, if we could have that up again, sorry, Carl, please. On that box, you'll see lots of stencils of parts of MACKMYRA's history. The building that you can see at the top, the front, sort of the front of a building there, that is the Brooks Distillery, the one that we saw the other side of when Carl showed that sort of top-down picture, looking by the river where it was earlier. The Brooks Distillery, where this whiskey takes its name from, was an incredibly important part of our history and our development. It was the first big boy, if you will, distillery that we moved into. Brooks translates into a number of different things in Swedish. It's a very old word, been around a long time, and it's taken on lots of different meanings. So it can mean sort of a type of utility, something useful, something like a tool, something that you can use. Something industrial. It can mean something that is your favorite, your favorite, your number one of something, or in the upper echelons of the opinion that you have on something, and then all sorts of other meanings it has as well. So the Brooks Distillery was, well, and still is actually, well, not still is, sorry, the building exists, but it was used for, it was a mill for a time, and then I think a blacksmith, a metal workers for some time as well. And then we moved into it 2001, 2002. When we finished building, because if I didn't mention that, we did design and build that Gravity Distillery ourselves. It's something that we wanted to do from the very beginning. I say we, the founders, of course. And then in 2011, when we moved into that distillery, we retained the ownership of the lease of Brooks Distillery, but mothballed it. So kept all the stills in there, kept all the equipment in there, but closed it up, locked the doors, left it as it was for a time. The people went back to service it, make sure that nothing was falling into disrepair. And then in 2017, reopened it under a new name of the Lab Plus Distillery, which we use as an experimental distillery now. We're making other different types of spirits. At the moment, the only thing that's been released from there are our 2 lines of gin that we have. So one's called Organic Gin, clues in the title, all organic botanicals that have gone into making it, and one is called Creator Gin, which is our craft gin designed to go be a robust gin that can stand up in cocktails and be used in the on-trade, bars and restaurants, without disappearing into the back of a cocktail and not having any gin flavour left. We haven't done anything funky with flavoured gins. They are gin classic juniper forward gin. So if anyone out there does like a gin and the classic form of it, both of those are, and I'd say predominantly as a whiskey drinker, but someone who has come to quite like gin over the last few years, both very good gins. So anyone is interested in gin, worthwhile looking at them. So the Brooks Distillery that you saw on the front of there is where this whiskey takes its name from. I'll talk about the cask recipe for this. So a number of different casks have gone into it, which is a bit more typical for us. So the majority of the casks used were 200-litre ex-bourbon casks. So we get our ex-bourbon casks, and anyone that wonders what ex this or ex that means with casks, it just means that the contents of that cask before you had it are whatever's in the title. So if it's ex-bourbon, it means that bourbon was in that cask before. If it's ex-Oloroso, it means Oloroso sherry was in there before. Ex-red wine, you get the theme hopefully now, it's whatever was in there before, which will have an influence on the flavour that it can impart and the way that it matures and develops your spirit once you put it into that cask. So the majority of it are ex-bourbon. We get them from Heaven Hill, Four Roses and Jack Daniels. I couldn't tell you exactly which combination of those have gone into that, but those are our three sources for it. The smaller percentage of casks that have been used are a mixture of 100-litre first fill Swedish oak casks, 100-litre first fill sherry casks, Oloroso casks, and then 200-litre ex-bourbon casks again. But the difference with this one is that they've, instead of having our elegant recipe, and we call elegant recipe for us is unpeated, is what we refer to it as. Instead of having elegant in there, they've had what we call our smoke tail recipe spirit, which is people probably know there's a few distilleries around which make both a peated smoky malt whiskey and an unpeated whiskey, and they might have two different brands coming out of the same distillery, Letchig and Tobermory, for example. Although I'm sure there are plenty of others that I could name. What most of those guys would do is once they've finished putting a peated spirit run through and making their peated whiskey for the few months of the year that they do, they'll then spend a bit of time climbing in and out of all of the bits of equipment, scrubbing the insides of it to make sure that there's no peat or no smoke left on the inside of that equipment, so that when they run through their unpeated spirit, that they end up with an unpeated spirit at the other end where there isn't any smoke present in that liquid. What we do instead, and Angela saw, Angela, master blender, she oversees quite a lot of production as well. What she saw fit to do was to try and find something else that would give her another bit of color on her palette for her to create her art. So something else, another tool in the shed, in the box, I guess. So instead of cleaning the equipment out once we finished making smoky spirit, we leave it, and then we run through our elegant spirit, and the first 2 or 3 runs will pick up, the first run that comes through will pick up quite a lot of residual smoke, residual peat that's been left over, and then the next 2 or 3 will a little bit less each time, and until it's no longer detectable, those casks that are filled are marked with a big X, so that Angela knows that those casks are smoke tail. So if she wants to have a little hint of smoke, just a little bit to try and create some balance in the whiskey that she's making and putting into a bottle, she'll use some of those smoke tail casks, basically. So just add a little bit in there. So if there is anybody who thinks they can detect, and I say thinks, can, because as I said, if you think you can, you can. But anyone who can detect any smoke in there, please do let me know. Always interested to see, the number of people that can find it. I'll tell you now, I've never been able to find smoke in this, not once. But every so often, maybe one in 2 tastings, there'll be at least one person who says, "Oh, is there a bit of smoke in this?" or "I'm getting some smoke," or something. And if you are, you'll be one of those 1 in, I think, 7,000 people who have quite susceptible to smoky flavors and profiles and things. So bear that in mind. If you are, there might be some money in that for you somehow. Couldn't tell you exactly how, but if you'll be one of those 7,000 people that can detect it. I've never been able to. Rafat here, so they're definitely spicier than Mac. A lot of pear, I would agree there for sure. Some floral notes and a bit of smoke on the finish. There we are, Rafat. So yeah, you are one of those 7,000, my friend. See if there's some way you can make some money out of that. Look into it, I would say, and let me know what you end up doing. So yeah, so some smoke on there, so a little bit. So I think the closest I think I might have ever come to it, but I might have just been kidding myself, was on the back end of the palate. So somewhere between, for me, whilst swallowing, basically, while it's still between the palate and the finish. I think maybe I can catch a glimpse of it, but I don't. I think I was probably just lying to myself at the time there. For me, this is much more in the sort of honeyed, stewed fruits, orchard fruits sort of territory. Definitely, I would agree as well with what Rafat said there about some more spice than the Mac, and that will come from, not necessarily exclusively from, but definitely it will be helping that spice appear. It will be the Swedish oak casks that we've used in this. Only a very small amount of them, but yeah, they add a little bit of spice to things, and I'll expand on that when we get to the third round, because there you'll find quite a bit of pepper and spice and things on there, and that is, for me, the influence of Swedish oak on that whiskey. James Wilkinson, so pear, drier than the Mac, no smoke when you're about the day job. Yeah, okay. James, you're in that with me, I think there. But yeah, so drier than Mac, I would say probably drier than the Mac, to be fair. So with Mac, because that's American oak casks that have been used exclusively in there, they tend to have a lot of sweetness. There's lots of wood sugars present in American oak, whereas you compare that to European oak, especially Swedish, but European oak in general, 10 times on average, and I have to speak generally because there's lots of different types of oak trees in Europe alone. But generally speaking, I might say 10 times fewer wood sugars present in European oak as there is in American oak. And that ends up giving you some sweetness, and takes that the dryness isn't really there. I think they're both similar in ABV, so it's probably not ABV having much of an effect on dryness or the converse wetness to it. I would say it's probably down to the casks that are being used, and the sweetness and sort of juiciness maybe that's coming through from the American oak casks on there. Now, excuse me, I'm going to have a little wet of my whistle. So score again. I do like that again. Anyone that's been to Sweden, please do let me know in the comments if you've ever been over there. Anyone's got any plans, intentions, hopes, aspirations to get over there? Interested to hear, as it is a beautiful country. I was there in July for a week, and it's fantastic, and especially where the distillery is on the edge of a large town, small city on the east coast, and then hundreds of miles of forest and mountains and wilderness and things. Mountains a bit further away, I appreciate, but lots of forest and outdoor stuff, and it is an incredibly nice place to be. Lots of bears and stuff as well. Anyone interested in seeing bears and wolves, get over to MACKMYRA for a tour, and then go off into the forest and the mountains with a guide, of course, or a large weapon or something to defend yourself with. And go off and see what wildlife and countryside you can see. Anyone else care to volunteer any tasting notes and things? Please do. I'll spend a moment more on Brooks Whiskey before we move on to Svensk. Anything else? Carl in the background, if you've ever had any questions or thoughts about Brooks Whiskey, feel free to pop them in the chat as well, and we'll see. I'll just say some of the other things about the Brooks distillery. So, and our earlier days maybe of MACKMYRA. That 100-litre still that you saw is what we used in the pilot distillery and series of gardens where we were. And from that, we only ever took a 30-litre cut when we started using it properly and maturing things away. A 30-litre cut, and by cut I mean 100 litres of washed, which is a beer without hops. Basically, it gets put into the still, heat the still up, and as it cools and condenses at the top, and it comes down its swan neck, up the swan neck, down the line arm into a condenser, turns back into liquid. And as it turns back into liquid, we'll ignore the first part. You've got the heads, the heart, and the tails. Ignore the heads, and then the heart cut is the 30 litres that we would then take, which meant that if we wanted to fill a 200-litre barrel, we would have to do 6.5, 7 distillations just to fill one cask, which was not absurd, but borderline absurd, perhaps. Better ways of sort of managing things, more efficient. So we started using 30-litre casks, which is another thing represented on the Brooks whiskey packaging on the box. And so I don't know if Carl might be quicker than me there, but you can see the 30-litre cask here. So it's just another bit of MACKMYRA's history on there, and then on the box as well, stencil of the original still that we used. Those 30-litre casks have ended up being sort of in Sweden synonymous with the MACKMYRA brand, because here's a nice picture of them there. This is in our Forest distillery, which is right next to the distillery itself. Very cool. Looks like the Velociraptor cage of the first Jurassic Park movie when you get over there. It's a really cool place to be. But yeah, so in Sweden we sell 1,000 30-litre casks a year. A big culture over there for buying casks of whiskey, either on someone alone or in a group or in a club or whatever it is. And it all came about. The only reason we sort of started doing it was because we had this tiny little still only taking 30-litre cuts, and it was again absurd trying to fill a 200-litre barrel with such small amounts. So started using 30-litre casks. When we moved to the Brooks distillery, however, we bought and put in two big, actual big stills, the sort of thing that you would be familiar with had anyone been to a Scottish whiskey distillery and done any tours, or any other distillery really now, I suppose, pot still stills specifically. Both came from Forsyths, which again, if you've done any whiskey distilleries of Scotland, or read some whiskey books, or talked to somebody that has, you probably would know that Forsyths really are the foremost makers of copper pot stills. There is the bottom half, the business end of them, and there's two going in there, which are both still in the Brooks distillery and are making gin for us. So are still very much being used. And then this is the Gravity, where we have and that's Jimmy on the right at the back. He's our head distiller, and then I can't quite tell who that would be at the front there. Not 100% sure, difficult to say. Anyone want to have a guess at that chap's name? Write in, and maybe we can sort something out as a gift, as a prize. We'll work it out. Yeah, I'll say, unless anyone else has got any. Oh, here we go. So moving to Sweden and wanting, okay, all right, nice. Already been a few times, always bring some whiskey home. Nice. So Rafa, you'll find it's quite difficult to buy whiskey over there. It's a very restrictive alcohol purchasing laws. I'm sure I don't need to tell you, I'm sure, but anyone else that's listening and with us, if you want to buy a bottle of whiskey in Sweden, you have to go to the Systembolaget, which is a chain of stores owned by the Swedish government. So a big government-owned monopoly, basically, on selling. You can go to bars and buy things by the dram, but if you want to buy a bottle, you have to buy it from Systembolaget. I think for a time we were doing some bottle your own whiskies at the distillery, where you could, pull a lever, fill a bottle up out of a cask there, but then you couldn't leave with the bottle. The bottle had to be sent to Systembolaget for you to then go and collect in a couple of weeks' time or whatever, because they really are. It's very regulated over there. Gothenburg, 1990. Okay, yeah, cool. Right, it's a 4-day mini cruise from Harwich. Yeah, 4 days. Is that? I suppose it's a mini cruise in terms of going on a cruise, but it's definitely still 4 days on a boat. Soon realised why it's so cheap. North Sea in December. Okay. A quick aside: my mum and her mate went on a cruise. They left for, it was meant to be 2 days or whatever it was. Went from Southampton to Rotterdam, and spent the entire time just in the English Channel, because it was too rocky to get anywhere else in. I think a window came crashing in from one wave, and turned around and had to go home. And their biggest complaint was the jigsaw puzzles didn't have the right amount of pieces, which I thought was a ridiculous complaint to make when you've not nearly drowned, but had a torrid time at sea. Been in 2016. In the distillery. Oh, brilliant. And a tour from Angela herself. Oh, it's fantastic to hear. Well, I hope you enjoyed it very much. Oh, very good tour. There we are. It's a top mark. So Angela, if you've met her, she's quite a character, I'll say to everyone else. Quite a bohemian type. She loves to dance. She teaches dance and things as well in her spare time, so not just making whiskey. And active member of lots of different communities and things in Sweden, and a big part of society at large. Maybe not, but very community focused person. And if you've seen anyone that's joined us before and any of the shows that she's come to join us on when we've launched products and we've done virtual shows or tastings that we've done, always got some bizarre hats or new hair color and things in as well. Big, massive sunglasses, or, you know, on the nice side of diva-ish, I would say. So yeah, interesting to hear that you had a tour with that. That's great. Right. Okay. On that note, I'd say let's move on to Svensk Ek, which is whiskey number 3. So Svensk Ek, which is, I'm butchering the pronunciation of Ek. It's closer to Iak, like Iak, basically Iak, which means Swedish oak. There is, and while everyone's pouring that, and let me get into this myself. I've got to open fresh. Excuse me while I multitask poorly. Okay, yeah, so Swedish oak, as everyone is pouring, I'll tell you a little history about Swedish oak, a little tale. Sweet oak has existed in Sweden for as long as really oak's sort of been around in Europe, but only in the southern parts of Sweden. So I think most people, if you think about trees in Sweden, in Scandinavia in general, you're probably not picturing oak trees. I imagine you're picturing big pine trees and the equivalent of, you know, these big evergreens. And that is what most of the forest is made up of in Sweden en masse. But in the south, there's been oak for some time. However, a new Swedish king sat the throne in 1830. So some, you know, nearly 200 years ago now, and he decided that there was not enough oak trees in there. And as any good statesperson would do, said we need to plant more trees to plan for the generations in the future, basically. As I said, any good statesperson looking for several generations down the line. So they wanted to plant more oak trees specifically for building ships. But, you know, the other parts of industry that would support building ships, of course, as well needed oak. But, you know, for the most part, it was about building ships for commerce, for empire, for maintaining, for wars, for, you know, trade, whatever it was around the world. They needed more oak. So he sent a number of emissaries, scouts around the country to look for the best place, most suitable place to plant as many oak trees as possible. And one of the scouts that came back had found on a little island called Visingsö. If you read it as you know, someone from England who butchers pronunciations of things, you read it as Visingo, it looks like, which is on the Lake Vättern, which is just to the southwest of Stockholm. And on this island, it's quite a fabled island as well. You know, various kings and things have lived there over the centuries gone, and artists and all sorts of stuff have been over there. They came back from this island saying we found some incredibly healthy, very, very good oak trees, and brought. I think they may well have chopped one down, or at least brought a portion of it back to the king to say, to the court, to say, here you go, look at these trees. So anyway, they decided that this island was where they were going to go and plant their trees. And over the next 10 years, so between 1830 and 1840, they set about planting, I think, as many as 200 or 300,000 oak trees. But in between and sort of before planting the oaks, to encourage the oak trees to grow as straight and tall and as possible before having any branches come out, because branches, any woodworkers in the chat tonight, or anyone that knows anything about it, you know, knots and branches coming off of trees, not fantastic for when you're trying to create something. Hopefully Carl, my colleague in the background, is nodding away, because he is, as well as being a magician with producing virtual tastings and hosting events for us, is a woodworker as well. So yeah, not very conducive to making things, and especially when you're looking at huge bits of wood. Here we go. Oh, so European oak and American oak, so you can see a different tightness in the grains that we have there. So the way that they got these oak trees to grow very straight and tall. If we could have that picture back, sorry, Carl, that you had there, on the sides of the roads here. I couldn't say if 100% of them are, but definitely one of the biggest one on the left that is closest to the road is, believe it or not, a Swedish oak tree. There'll be different types of Swedish oak in different parts of Sweden that look a bit more familiar to us, you know, to Europeans that are with us at least. Oh, here we go. This is perfect. So on the right-hand side, those are Swedish oak trees on this island. So to encourage them to grow that way, which looks unlike any oak tree anyone I think would have seen before. They planted rows and rows and rows of different trees, so birch, sycamore, sap, whatever it was, and planted rows of them to encourage the young oak saplings to grow as tall as they could before they started sprouting branches, so that they could capture as much sunlight as possible. So, to go up as tall as they could, which was perfect for building ships, for long bits of wood, to make whatever part of the ship you would be, not just a mast, but talking about the bow, the hull needs to be straight, no knots, and make sure it's going to be as much wood and as much yield as you can possibly get. And I think that planting those trees in between, that might be something that's common, and lots of other people have done it. I've not seen it before myself, but I always think it's quite an impressive piece of agricultural engineering, basically, to try and get these trees to look like that. However, right, so all these good things, done, and all this clever planning that they did in the research to find out where to go. If anyone knows anything about nautical history, 30 years after they started planting these trees, the first ironclad ships began to sail the seas. So I think the French had the first, 1860, give or take, and then in the American Civil War there was two, one on either side. The Monitor, I think the USS Monitor, and then the Confederates had their own as well. I can't recall the name of it, but yeah. So after 30 years, ironclad ships began to start sailing the seas. One big difference between, to go back to American oak and European oak and compare them, American oak, a big benefit of American oak is that you can harvest that tree for its wood and to turn into casks or furniture or whatever it is after maybe 70, 80 years, depending on where you are. Whereas European oak, you're generally speaking looking at a minimum of 150 years, let's say. And in places like Sweden, it could be that little bit longer as well, because it's, a colder climate and the trees take longer to grow. So you've planted all these trees, hundreds of thousands of trees, that will take you at least 150 years to grow and be ready. And 30 years after you start planting them, the technology of wooden ships has begun to become obsolete. So it ends up with this island with a huge oak forest that has been barely touched. The trees that are there are perfect for building furniture, perfect for building casks. And that island specifically is where we get the Swedish oak Swedish oak from, that we make our casks with. So we have, I think the island itself and the forest has been maintained and managed for since its inception by the same family. So I think they're 4 or 5 generations in have been looking after this forest. So whenever we think we need some more casks to start coopering things together, a tour is done on that island with that family, with the current generation that are looking after it. We go and pick and choose a few trees. We don't use many. We use them very sparingly, and a lot of that's got to do really with probably how powerful the oak is and its influence, which brings me on to the whiskey itself. So if anyone's had a nose, had a taste, and has got anything they'd like to pop in the chat, please do. But for this, I'll lead you a little bit and say the orchard fruits that I've mentioned. My first and favourite of all Swedish whiskies. Yeah, well, skål to you. The orchard fruits I mentioned on the other two, and that you can find in some of our other whiskies as well. The influence of Swedish oak casks in this, for me, gives it a cooking effect. So rather than having sort of fresh apple, pear, and banana, this to me becomes a baked apple. Like cooked pear, caramelized pear maybe, and then some spices. And talking a moment earlier, I can't recall who it was we had in the chat, but a bit spicier, saying the Brooks whiskey compared to the Mac. I think this spices, black pepper, white pepper maybe on the back of the tongue, a little bit akin to Talisker, perhaps a little peppery spice, but then also some sweeter spices as well, things like cinnamon. I think I get in this, which I don't really find too much of in the other whiskies, especially the ones that we've had so far. And when I think cinnamon and then cooked apple, I think apple pie. So when I was writing notes for this, when I started, apple pie I always sort of had in. I don't think it's apple pie is the main thing here, but for me, definitely, apple pie is definitely in the mix. But some spice and some dark chocolate, maybe some bitterness, but bitter the way that dark chocolate is bitter compared to milk chocolate, perhaps. So not quite sweet, but some sweetness there, some bitter sweetness to it. Oh. Yeah. Cheers. Yeah, this one's definitely got the a bigger, fuller profile, I would say, than the others. And the ABV being up to 46.1% definitely helps. I think the profile of it is a lot more robust. So yeah, smell the wood, light caramel, cinnamon indeed. Yeah, very good. So light caramel, I'd say that. So cask recipe for this. All of the liquid here begins its life in American oak, it's in ex-bourbon casks. And then the final recipe, after a bit of tweaking with this, because it did take some time to work out what ratios to use, the final one that we landed on, that we've been using for some time now, is 10% of that liquid that's been in ex-bourbon casks being transferred into virgin Swedish oak casks. So only 10% of this liquid has been in Swedish oak. It's been in there for about 18 months or so. Because Swedish oak itself is so powerful and can overcook and overwood the liquid inside it rather quickly. We only use 10% of it for this. I saw another comment pop up there as well, Carl. If we can have that back from that with. Yeah, but very oaky. Yeah, so even that 10%, there's still some oakiness to it for sure. Yeah, vanilla and cinnamon also. Yeah, so a Swedish oak itself, as I keep saying, very, very powerful. Lots of tannins, very few wood sugars and sweetness there. Very few vanillins, things that are more common with American oak casks and things as well. But because we've used a lot of ex-bourbon casks in with this, there's vanilla notes and things coming through from there, but you won't really find that from Swedish oak itself, not in any major way. One of the ways that we try and reduce the amount of tannins and that sort of drying tannic influence in there is before making the casks, the wooden staves are air dried for about 2 years, or at least 2 summers, rather than putting that wood into a kiln to dry that wood out before coopering it and making it into a cask. We leave the staves out, the big, before they become proper staves and cut into shape, the big poles of wood, basically rectangular poles of wood, get left out for 2 years to dry, because as the rain lands on them, it helps flush out some of the tannins as well. So if we were to put this Swedish oak wood into a kiln, as they will do when they're making American oak barrels in America for the bourbon industry, if we were to put it into a kiln, it would lock in all of those very bitter, very tannic notes and properties within there. So, we might have 1% of this whiskey would be in there for 18 months rather than 10. So by air drying those staves and taking an extra 2 years to actually make a cask, which is quite, whiskey, you think about how long it's been in the cask and the liquid's been maturing, but actually that cask itself has a journey, and in our case with Swedish oak, of at least 2 years before it even becomes a cask in shape, and then plus the 150 for a tree, but we'll say, keep it simple, keep it sweet. 2 years of air drying, which I think is goes into towards showing a little bit of care and consideration that we put into making sure that everything is as good as possible. And if it takes a little bit longer, it takes a little bit longer. So anyone else care to as I say, volunteer any notes, please do. I'm going to have a little wet of my whistle again, so cheers. Yeah, that orange peel, orange skin, definitely in there for me. I don't know if it's just because it's an orange bottle, but yeah, I definitely get a bit of that. Not quite like marmalade or anything, but yeah, orange peel for sure. Yeah. Oh, I was just about to say, actually, yeah, good shout. Thanks very much, Carl, for the reminder for the corporate plug. So we are doing a deal this evening. Anyone that wants to buy any of the whiskies that they've tried tonight can, Carl, if you can pop, please. I'm sure you probably got one ready. Yeah. So use code STARSMOKE on mackmyra.co.uk or mackmyra.com. And if you buy a bottle of Stjärnrök, which we're about to go into now, you'll be able to get 40% off of any of the other 4 whiskies that we've had. So anyone wants to buy the next whiskey, and we'll pour it in a moment. Anyone wants to buy a bottle of this can, and if you put the code StarSmoke in, 40% off of one of the Core Range bottles as well. I've been told to not guarantee any delivery before Christmas. We can say it will be with everyone before New Year's. That, you know, we can just about touch wood, you know, barring any individual mishap or anything that happens on the way. Can just all but guarantee before New Year's for sure. Before Christmas, there's an outside chance. There's a chance, but be, you know, mindful that it's rather chaotic out there with delivery and shipping at the moment. So please do bear that in mind. And if anyone does want to order it, I would say time is of the essence. This is live until Sunday, I believe. Carl will chime in and let me know. Otherwise, oh, there we go. Yeah, and valid until Sunday. So. Yeah, anyone that wants to, StarSmoke, buy a bottle of Stjärnrök, get 40% off the rest. And all this talk about Stjärnrök, probably time to move into it, I would say. So, yeah, let's get a bottle of that, or a dram of that, sorry, on the go. Yeah, Stjärnrök. There's that, the box with all the stars on. A little clue as to the name. So, Stjärnrök. Means star smoke in Swedish, and I think it was Rafa that said he was going to be moving to Sweden soon. Don't lean too heavily on copying my pronunciation of things. I do my very best. We have lots of training, Carl and I and my colleagues with Sweden. We have lots of teams and Zoom calls and stuff with each other where we get trained on products as they come out, and ones that have been out before. And they do help us quite a lot with pronunciations, but I always feel like I'm not doing it 100% right. So yeah, so I'll say, you know, don't copy the way that I say things necessarily. Some of them I'm quite confident with now, but yeah, they keep releasing things that make it more and more difficult to say. So yeah, and we often get teased actually about it in our meetings with Sweden. So great, right? Yeah, if you haven't already, please pour a dram of Stjärnrök. So Stjärnrök, this is the first whiskey that we're having this evening, the first and only from our seasonal range. So as I mentioned, the other 4 are part of our core range. So they'll be the same year after year, batch after batch. Should be no difference between them. You know, we might make a few 10,000 here, 20,000 there, and then we make another 10, 20,000 of that same bottle once we've sold them or close to, and it should be the same time after time, profile always the same, like a Coca-Cola should be the same year after year, country after country, wherever you are. That's the same with our core. And good, and a selection and offering of, you know, examples of what we can do, what our distillery character's like, what our spirit character is like. That's the core. The seasonal range come out. We have 2 releases a year. One will be spring summer, one will be autumn winter. And the idea of the seasonal range is to have the MACKMYRA spirit character as the lead. So it should be familiar as a MACKMYRA product, as a MACKMYRA whiskey, but with little tweaks maybe, so it'll be attuned to the prevailing season where they've come out. So our last spring summer release, birch sap, birch sap wine cask influence, and was very fresh. Was like spring in a glass. It was the perfect whiskey for, you know, spring and summer, light and refreshing. Some good waxy texture to it, lots of green apples and icing sugar and things like that. Really, and it was one of the best selling whiskies we've had. It went down incredibly well. And then the autumn winter releases tend to have a bit more body, a bit more oomph, something that you could see yourself, you know, sitting around a fire pit outside on a cold winter's evening, maybe looking up at the stars if you're lucky. But something that's got a you know, warming and a bit of warmth to it. We've had some that have had, you know, mulled wine cask influence, one with a winter glow. And that's about as sort of as wintry a dram, I think, as you can get. But this one, Stjärnrök, means star smoke. So as you can see on the box that Carl popped up, you know, little stars. The packaging for all the seasonal whiskies we have always have actually something to do with the cask that have been used, or the season, or the, you know, some sort of theme to it. So all very packaging has no bearing, of course, I appreciate, on the whiskey itself. It's the liquid that is the most important. Do you like to drink it? Do you not like to drink it? packaging is secondary. But I don't think the packaging is irrelevant, not for me anyway. If you're anything like me and you buy more whiskey than you can drink and you have to look at it for some time, it's nice to have something that looks nice and pretty. I say, let me know if you disagree, because I'm very valid if you do. But yeah, I do like a pretty box and things with it, and I think this has definitely got it. There we go. Oh, lovely. So you can see there the smoke coming up the side of the bottle, the stars in the sky, and what we can see in the foreground there, if anyone can see those little bushel, little branchy things, those are juniper twigs, juniper berry or juniper bush twigs, branches. So no berries at all, but the branches you can see pictured there. That is because in our peating process, when we are making our smoked malt, which, as I mentioned, we do ourselves, we do something rather Scandinavian, rather Swedish with it. So for thousands of years in Sweden, in Norway, in Finland, people have used other ingredients rather than when they're making a fire to dry and cure meat and fish for the cold winter seasons. They will add other ingredients to that fire to try and get a bit of flavour and a bit of something in, so it's not just dried meat for 6 months and dried fish for 6 months. They try and get a bit of something in there. And one of the things that people have been doing for thousands of years is adding juniper branches into that mix to try and get some other flavour into it. So when we started in '99, I mentioned Swedishness as one of the founding principles, and the founders wanted everything to be as Swedish as possible. And because we're not beholden to the rules and regulations of the Scotch Whisky Association, which have a very important role, I'll grant you, in Scotch production, but because we didn't have to adhere to their rules, we can do, as long as we're making a single malt the way that it's supposed to be made, batch 100% malted barley being the grain used, batch distillation in a pot still, and and 3 years in an oak cask, and then whatever other stages I may well have skipped over there. After that, we can, within reason, do what we like, and adding juniper branches to the peat is something that they wanted to do. It's not there for a gimmick. It's not there for something silly. It is there to sort of cement and introduce a new way of doing things. Is Swedishness and innovation rolling into one. As I said earlier, those three founding principles tend to feed into one another. So only a small amount of the burning mass is juniper branches, but it adds a resinous element to the smoke that I've not found in any other peated whiskey I have. A good proportion of what I have behind me there is peated whiskey from various different countries, and yeah, I've never had anything quite like this, for good, for bad, whatever, however you respond to this new type of smoke. If it is new to you, as I said, for good or for bad, we've all got our own personal things, but I've loved this since day one. Our smoky recipe, at least, not just Stjärnrök here, but it's different. It's different and it's unique, but for me, it hits all the right spots. So interested to see what people think of it. So yeah, so wrap it there with spring in a bottle. Yeah, Björksav. Oh, and actually that is, and this, I didn't put this here on purpose for it, but because Björksav, the spring in a bottle whiskey, sold so well, we're changing a couple of things next year in the way that some of our lines are, and because that's so well and sold out in 5 months, it usually takes us anywhere from 18 months to 2 years to finish selling each seasonal release. Because this one sold out so quickly, they're bringing it back. So this is basically, excuse that big bit down there, it's been in my backpack as I take it around to customers and shops and stuff to give them tastings. But I've got a better one to show you. My room is just filled with whiskey. Yeah, so Björksav is now available in this form. So whereas it used to come in the sliding box that seasonals have, this is now forming part of our core range. So yeah, we started selling it now, but it's going to really be probably released next year. Björksav. So you wouldn't have been able to try it because all of it was gone. So I suppose some shops and retailers would have had it, actually, forgive me. But now you can get that. So if anyone does want to have a look at the spring summer one, if that sounded any good to them, please do check it out. We might have some of that on our website. You'll definitely be able to find it at some retailers now as well. So keep your eyes peeled. Yeah, back to Stjärnrök. anyone in the room, so to speak, this evening that hasn't traditionally liked smoky whiskey, anyone that is partial to it, interested to see sort of what split we have in the room. I did see something else just pop up there from Nick, I think. Oh, I like this one, but the Bloomsdale is my favourite. But I've not even tried that, so I couldn't comment on that. That came out before I joined, and there was none of it left. When I went over to Sweden, there were, I think, probably a good like 30 or 40 that I hadn't tried before. And I just the 2 nights that I did manage to have a drink with some colleagues at the distillery in the visitor centre, I just didn't get my way over to it. So I will be back over there sometime in 2022, and I'll definitely try it there. Interesting. That's definitely. I think that came out. That must be 5 years that came out. It's hard to keep up when they come out before you joined to see, but yeah. Carl, in the background, mate, if you let us know if you've ever had the pleasure of trying the Blomsterdead or any of the older releases, perhaps. I'm curious to see. So on this, cask recipe for Stjärnrök. Number of different casks have gone into it. We've got some of our older ex-bourbon stock, ex-bourbon casks gone into this. I think a couple from 2008 maybe, but then some from 2010. The main like overarching, I guess, description for this one would be, whereas Björkshab before I said was Berkshire wine cask, this one is described as a smoky Oloroso, basically. So smoky spirit, smoky whiskey. That's the main flavor component contributor from the casks is from Oloroso casks, from Oloroso sherry casks. So yeah, if anyone's getting any of that classic sort of dried fruit, dried berries, that sort of thing that you might expect to get with Oloroso, that's because it's coming from Oloroso casks. So this one's done actually pretty well so far as well. I think because for years we've had all these seasonals coming out that have got Birchsap wine, this, and Yak Liquor was one from last year as well. That was Jakt wine in Sweden is hunting wine, and it's made up of like 90% lingonberries and 10% blueberries that have then been, had their sugars fermented and turned into wine. And I think the seasonals, some adventurous people see the seasonals and they say, oh, I'll try a bit of that. I've tried lots of Scotch and stuff before. Let's see what this world whiskey is like and have a go. And then other people where we've been growing quite well in the UK in the last sort of couple of years. I think some people have seen the seasonals, they might want to dip a toe, but it's not quite familiar enough for them maybe, and they haven't. And then others that have just, I think, gradually done, better and better. I think each season has come out. But whereas this has finally got something, I think, that people have gone, oh, I know I like smoke, I know I like Oloroso, I'm going to buy that whiskey. So we sold out of our UK allocation of this in about 3 weeks. Which, talking about those ratios earlier, usually taking 18 months to 2 years to sell out across the world. To sell our UK allocation, which is sizable, the first one in 3 weeks was just, we were gobsmacked. We had lots of people, lots of customers of ours, like shops and things, asking to get hold of it. We just couldn't do it. So we got another load over, sold that out in a week. Most of it was sold before it arrived. And then we got an allocation, I think, was pinched from Germany, if I'm not mistaken, from our German company, where we had a load of their bottles shipped over to us as well. So, yeah, this one's moved. Not everyone likes smoky whiskey. I'm sure not everyone here this evening, is necessarily thinking, oh, I can see why it sold out so quickly. But I think this has done really well so far. No Bloomsdale yet. So, well, yeah, I think, Carl, mate, if you and I get over there, let's have a glass together and we'll think of Niek as we're over there. Yeah, I think James, I saw one from there. James saying, oh, here we go. So Niek, so smoke taste is more there than the fruitiness. Yeah, so I think this is smoky Oloroso. I think smoke is at the front of this. But if you do have any water at home, add a bit of water to it, and it brings those fruits right out. They come like jumping out of the glass and out of it within reach, of course. But yeah, you add a bit of water to this, that smoke and that sort of tarry, earthy smoke gets pulled back a little bit, and then the fruits come forward to it. So depending on how you enjoy your whiskey, how you drink yours, add a bit of water to it and see what you think. Yeah, so James there, not usually a smoke fan, but this is nicely understated. I think I would agree with that. Now, while I was saying there that the smoke is like at the front of this, I don't think this is some in your face, slap you around the face smoky dram. It's definitely at the front. I would call it perhaps the front man of the band that this flavor profile is. but I wouldn't call it the front man and the backing singers. I'd say it's the front man, but complemented by an ensemble behind them. I think I'll probably get away with that as a metaphor. Sounds right to me. Might even use that again. I'll have a sip of this and say score, and thanks for everyone that's still with us. So cheers. Excuse me, yeah, so just chewing on that one. So that lingers. I can feel that. I don't know if it's now. There's quite a lot of smoke there was lingering for me on the back of the palate and on the initial part of the finish. And the smoke sort of goes away a bit, and I'll get like spicy, some sort of spicy fruits and things like lingering on the back, on the edges of my tongue. So if anyone else is having the same thing. Raf, I like the smoky note. Not a fan of the berry undertone though. Well, thanks for your honesty. Can't have one for everyone. Svensk will make sure that you get some Svensk available and want to enjoy. But yeah, they're not sure about the berry undertone. I get that, and each of their own. As I said earlier, every answer is right, and however somebody responds to a whiskey is exactly how they should. So yeah, I think the berry undertone. I'd be interested to know if there are other. Is that across the board, Raf? Is that just with this? Is that something do you tend to steer away from Oloroso cask whiskies, or is it just sort of this one in particular? Let us know. And anyone else that wants to chime in with any notes or any questions, anyone curious about how other things are made or how we go about our business, please do chime in. So that one, I had a whiff for a moment there of orange peel again. But then it was gone as soon as I was about to open my mouth and saying, there's some dark sweetness to it. That's because I can't think of a better way of describing it, but there's some sweetness to the nose that's sort of, yeah, something dark, not dark chocolate or anything like that, but like a dark, weird sort of dark sweetness on there. Oh, well, one more for me. Very good. But excuse me. I don't want to rush anyone along or anything, but that might be time to move onto Stjärnrök. If there's any objections, I think let's move on. So Stjärnrök means in Swedish smoke. Rök, not rock. Although you would be forgiven for saying rock, as many Swedish colleague has forgiven me in the first few months of working here. So Swedish smoke. This is one of the whiskies where before I joined MACKMYRA, I had a bottle of this already. I found MACKMYRA at a whiskey festival near me. I live near Reading in Berkshire in the southeast of England, just out to the west of London, and there's a travelling whiskey show called the Whiskey Affair. Has a sort of pop-up festival in a number of different places, and that's where I found MACKMYRA in 2018, I think it was 2017, perhaps the first time. And as well as having a bottle of AI, the whiskey that we did in partnership with Microsoft, if anyone's ever seen that, and AFA from our Moment range, it was this for me, and this was one that as I said a moment ago, each of their own, not everyone likes everything, etc. But for me, I loved this the moment I tried it. I'd never had any smoky whiskey like it before. It was completely unique to me. A profile unlike anything, and I'm a big fan of peated whiskey. Most of what I've got behind me is unpeated. I'd say probably a good 80% doesn't have any peating at all. But I'm a huge fan of smoky whiskey in general. Not everyone I've ever tried I've liked, but generally speaking, I do really like it. And this, to have found something that was so unique, and yeah, you look at the Kidalton 3, they might be known as the Southeastern Isla distillery. So Ardbeg, Lafroig, Lagavulin. I really enjoyed those, years ago, still do to this day. But in my early days of whiskey, they were some of the most influential and important whiskies for me to try, and as I was exploring things. And one of the things I really liked about them was that medicinal TCP iodine sort of note. And then when I tried this, and it didn't really have that at all. You might find it if someone can find it. You know, a medicinal note in there. Please, you know, let us know. And if you can find it, it exists. But for me, I couldn't. And it blew my mind, because to me at that point, you know, smoky whiskey was all of it had some medicinal qualities to it. So, you know, iodine, as I said, TCP, and to have something here, which for me was always just about this was just smoke. Smoke and maybe some resinous smoke to it, but it was unique. The first time I gave a dram of this to a friend of mine, he said, and I've used this line for years now, he said on the nose for him, and then on the palate, and then back to the nose, he said like a campfire in the rain. So like there's smoke to it, but like a wet, damp sort of smoke, like, you know, a barbecue that had been left out overnight and the dew was on it. Or as I said, you know, a campfire in the rain, just as the rain comes in, as you've got your fire going, and you can sort of that damp sort of log, or a wet log being burned or something like that. And yeah, it's somewhat poetic maybe, that as a notion, but yeah, I've latched onto that, and I've never forgot it. So yeah, here we go. Cheers again. Right. I could and do drink that regularly, responsibly, of course, but yeah, that is quite often in my glass. Carl's a big fan of Rook, loves what juniper does to the smoke. Yeah, I'd agree with that. Yeah, me too, I'd say. And that the fact it's so different and authentically Swedish, I think, is a massive thing. Did you see one pop up there, Carl? I'll have that back off you. So Ras is, these are just my preferentials. Appreciate the art of Stjärnrök. It's nothing like I have tasted before. Interesting experience, just not my cup of tea when it comes to smoky whiskies. I mean, that's fair. That's fair to say. I'll take that for sure. And Stjärnrök, much more pleasant to me. Ask. Oh, well, brilliant. This one's landed. And you might be typing on your phone, or you can tell me how the circle and the dot above the O in Rook and the A in Skull. Because unless I'm on my phone, I don't know how to do it on the keyboard. So whenever I'm emailing colleagues in Sweden, I just copy and paste it off of Google and pop it into a thing. So if you are typing on a keyboard, Raf, please feel free to send us a message and let us know how to do it. Carl may well be laughing in the background. He may be wincing that I'm bringing it up, but Carl might be in the same position as me, because I've never seen him put the dots over the letters on a keyboard. But then we are writing in the British QWERTY, so maybe that makes a difference. But yeah, glad you're enjoying the Rook. So cask recipe for Stjärnrök. All the casks that we've used in this are between 30 and 128 litres in size. So 30 to quarter cask size, basically. So sort of a punchy cask, punchy development of things going on in there. We've used a mixture of American oak, Swedish oak, ex-bourbon, and an Oloroso casks with this. So again, another thing we've got 4 different types of casks going into the whiskey. 46.1% ABV, and the same as just about everything we've had this evening, apart from the Mac, natural colour. So no added colouring at all. So all of the colour that you can see in your glass, which is true for Svensk Ek, true for Brooks Whiskey, true for Stjärnrök, true for Stjärnrök, all natural colouring in there. So no added colouring at all, which I think is to get that sort of colour on them, I think is rather impressive. And this, yeah, smoky and herbaceous, I think for me, I referenced, Ardbeg, Lefroy, Lagavulin, and saying, this is dislike them or unlike them, because it doesn't have that sort of medicinal note to it. But I think for me at least, Ardbeg in particular, I've got a few pop back there somewhere. Ardbeg has this sort of like herbal, herbaceous, sort of like green note to it, and maybe Lefroy a bit as well, actually. And I think this does have that. So I think it's not an unfair, for me at least, comparison to make between the two, with that herbal, herbaceous element to them. Yeah, have we got any other notes come through? Yeah, well, yeah, Raf's chimed in there with yeah, so a Swift key, keyboard and phone. There you go. Yeah, so on the phone, yeah, that's less impressive now, Raf, I'll say. But yeah, well, hopefully maybe we can all work as a team. Carl in the background, you and I can work out how to do it on the phone. A clever thing to do. We go. So there's a chocolatey note to it as well. I don't know if anyone's getting any sort of chocolatey notes there. But on the nose, I don't get so much of the that sort of resinous tar, like black tar sort of note that I do get on the Stjärnrök on the previous one that we had. I don't quite get that so much on this one. Maybe on the palate I think I do, but on the nose is a bit sweeter. The nose is like smoke, sweet, and herbs for me. Yeah, I'd say that. So our peating process, our malting process, I mentioned when we started, and as I said, to this day, I don't think anybody in Sweden is peating any malted barley. There are a number of they're known as maltsters, so companies that malt barley for people for the brewing industry mainly, and for different types of feed and things as well. But no one was peating anything. So when we started, we would send the founders knew that they wanted to make both unpeated and peated malt, because there's a huge appetite for both in Sweden basically, and they wanted to be able to cater to both. So we would send our barley, which incidentally is called tipple. It's a brewer's barley. I think grown sort of across most parts of Europe, northern and central Europe. You'll see quite a lot of tipple being grown. We would send that off to Viking Maltings, which is near Gothenburg on the west coast, which is where a 4-day cruise went to. So we sent it over there, and then the founders, once it had been malted and turned into what's known as green malt, green barley, they'd drive over, go up and down this elevator with a wheelbarrow, fill the malted barley into the wheelbarrow, back up and down, repeat the process, and then drive back to Gävle, to the distillery, which isn't really a very efficient way of doing things. So we decided to malt our own barley as well as smoke it, basically. So we set up our some very small, very small, very humble beginnings. A big sort of rectangular cuboid bin that might look like something that you keep logs in or something, or cushions for your outdoor seating on your patio, which we then filled with the barley to then malt it, and then took that barley out and put it into something we'd already made at the beginning, our smoking house, but a very small thing, like a big dog kennel or duck house basically. And what we can see here, just to flash forward quickly to modern day peating, from these makeshift wooden handmade things that we had, this is where we now peat our barley. So these are the makeshift things at the beginning. So on the right hand side there, that's our big malting floor basically in that big sort of bin, and then on the left is the dog kennel, duck house, the pagoda roof. So the fuel source goes in the bottom, peat in the bottom, and then that you can see above MACKMYRA written there is a flap on a door that comes down. Your barley goes in, and this is something that had to move from several different locations. Because neighbours complained about the smoke. So where it is here is in one of the founders' houses right on the coast, to keep it away from as many upset neighbours as possible. So where this is here, this gentleman here is called Herken. He's been with us for 8 or 9 years, I think now, possibly a little bit longer actually. What he is opening the door to, and where he is standing, is in the first couple of meters. Where he's standing is the first couple of meters of a big shipping container, which has then been converted. And it's got the back, the back 95% of it is a big smoking room with the malted barley goes in, and then smoke that comes from the kiln that we can go back just for 1 second, Carl, sorry. The kiln that you can see to his left, the top corner of it, is where we put the peat in. Smoke comes up out of that chimney through into the smoking room. And we go for, I think, 36 hours of peat smoke into that barley, which is very long time to peat your barley. Some of the more peated whiskies that are around, such as Lafroig and Lagavulin and things, that we go to a ppm of around 65 ppm, meaning parts per million. So phenols, the peaty element of smoke coming out of peat. We go to 65. Places like Lagavulin and Lafroig might be 30, 40, I think, something like that, give or take. But whereas I don't think this is as smoky as some of those smoky whiskies people are more familiar with, because we do things on such a small scale. Because we're making it ourselves, we only do about 80 tons a year of peated barley, whereas we will go through, it might be 4 figures of unpeated barley get used, thousands of tons of it, whereas we only make about 80 tons of smoky. We use a small portion of that smoked barley when we are making our peated whiskey. So instead of putting all of the barley that's going through in a peated spirit run, not 100% of that barley is peated barley. About 23 point something percent of it is peated barley that goes into it. So we're making a very, 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 very smoky barley, and then we're using a portion of that to mix in with unpeated barley to go through, which means that we can do things on a smaller scale, but still end up with a very smoky whiskey, and a suitably smoky whiskey at the end, the one that we're looking for. So yeah, that's a little bit of background into our peating process, basically. And if you ever get over to the distillery, you can go and have a look at our malting floor, a purpose-built. We've got an actual building for it now. It's not just in that garden bin. And you can go and have a look at where that happens. You might be there at the time of year where it is happening, and then you can see the big shipping container for it. I don't know if Carl might have a picture of the shipping container. It's one of those things that you can see that the distillery and the founders were engineers. They weren't. I mentioned earlier, they weren't sort of designers. They weren't brewers. They weren't this, that, the other. So this shipping container looks like a shipping container set off to the side of a distillery around, with a few trees around it to, give it some camouflage and disguise. But if it works, it works. And if it does the job, it does the job. And that's what the founders were sort of thinking. They were, we'll worry about the looks of it later. We'll get something that works and is efficient and does the job for it now. And that's exactly what it does. So if you do get over there, please, go and have a look at those as well. So we did have, while I was going, talking about those, the peating bits there, we saw some comments come up, Carl. So if you could pop them back up, mate. Thank you. Nice one. James said, agree, much more pleasant than the Freud. Peaty, not my bag, but this is quite pleasant. James, I say in just about every tasting I do, no matter that we've done with Stjärnrök involved in now, I say, and confidently, there is there's often, at least one person in a tasting that will say something similar to what you've said there, basically. And so this is, if you know anyone like yourself as well that hasn't been too keen on smoky whiskey before, please introduce them to this, because they might have the same experience as you, where we'll have somebody that says, didn't like some variation of, didn't like smoky whiskey, never really liked peated whiskey, but they'll either say, but this is okay, or this is good, or I want a bottle of it, or I'm never going to drink anything else again. Somewhere, not too many on that, but somewhere on that spectrum, there will be at least one person that says, and I think it's because this is so different to what many people, I don't want to assume, what you have or haven't tried, but for lots of people, peated whiskey is basically just, the ones that you see more commonly on the back bar in a pub, or something that you might have tried, I don't know, around a friend's house, or something that could be something they picked up from one of the big supermarkets, which tend to be things like the Freud and Lagavulin, let's say. And this is so different to them. And I think this is, hopefully, maybe for you now, James, whether or not it's with MACKMYRA or other whiskies as well, I would encourage you to go and see if there are other smoky whiskies around. Highland peated whiskies from Scotland, for example, use very different peat to what some of the whiskies the distillers in Ireland use, which would be a bit more heathery, sweet smoke and things as well. So maybe give them a try. What were the other ones that we saw there as well? I think Ref had one. Stjärnrök, really nice and balanced. Definitely feel the smoke, but there's a lot of sweetness there. Do like it. Sweet and smoky, I think, is a lot of people's jam, I would say. So so not surprised to hear. Niak said a little bit looks like an optimal smoke side. So if I take your meaning from that, talking about the smoke coming out of what Herken's picture was, maybe, I'm not sure when that comment came in, what we were looking at the time. Or you're talking about like the high ppm perhaps of it. I think some of the optimals have come down, I know, to at least 90 or so. I've got edition 10 up there that was around that. But let us know exactly what you meant if I haven't covered that properly yet, please. And then Rafa, and there was definitely another one in there. I think I saw someone mention Ardbeg at some point. Yeah. Got to reach for our big to have a comparison. Yeah, give it a go, Raf, and say, you know, I'm not saying they're exactly the same whiskies by any stretch, but I find a little herbaceous, green, leafy note sometimes in Ardbeg. Whether or not it's in the 10 or you find it in the Ugadal or whatever product it would be. But definitely, I always find a little bit of something herbal there to it. So an interesting side by side. And if you come back and join us again for another tasting, Raf, I'd be really interested to hear, how you got along with that and that comparison. Please do let us know. Yeah. James said I basically avoid peat and smoke, to be honest. Yeah. I think that, you've ended up with a tasting set tonight. So you've had a smoky one that you've, not had to try, but, you've had it in front of you. Said sort of not to, perhaps at least. But I would say if you've, as you open your eyes, perhaps, sort of getting at, have a try of some other things, and just to give, another company a little big up, maybe try some Highland Park or something. That's got some smoke to it, but it's a very, very different type of smoke to the distilleries on Islay that use Islay peat. Not all of them use Islay peat. Some of them use a mixture of Islay peat and Highland peat. But depending on where that peat comes from, will determine what type of smoke you're going to have, basically. So whatever has gone in, whatever biomatter has gone into making that peat over the centuries and the millennia, will determine the flavour profile of it. So things like Highland peat tend to be more based in heather back when they were still plants and alive. So you get a more heathery, sweet smoke to them. So I wouldn't say go jumping in, at the deep end and try an Octomore that Niex mentioned there. But try some other things maybe, or don't. You do you. But if it has opened your eyes, glad to be part of that journey, I'd say. And Nick did say something about the ppm. So up there with the ppm basically. So high ppms. Great. Right. Well, I'll say that's the last whiskey, I guess. So please let us know any comments or questions that you might have. But I think it's probably time to ask what people's favourites were. If anyone wants to volunteer what their favourites are, we started with the Mac. Please let us know, or if you want to put what order they were, what your favourite to least favourite would be. However active you feel like being with the typing. If you want to just let me know the favourite, let me know the favourite. If you want to let me know the least, let me know the least. It's always interesting to see sort of where people are and where people stand and what was enjoyed. Sometimes you get people it's all the same thing was the favourite. Other times it's a sort of spread across the lot. And if you see the comment there from Carl, what's your favourite of the evening? Sven, he votes for that every time. Some people would have a different favourite depending on what day of the week it is, depending on what they've eaten that day, depending on the music that they've got going on, the company that they keep. But Stjärnrök, I think time and time again for Carl is his favourite. So I think at this point he definitely means it. I believe that. So please let us know in the comments. I don't know what my favourite is of the evening. I think Svensk I think is just one of the, when I've got friends that come round and I'm in a position where I can give them a little dram, a little taste of something they haven't tried before. That's one of the ones I tend to get out as have a look at this, have a look at at MACKMYRA and then see what you think. But Stjärnrök, I think Stjärnrök I think does I think Stjärnrök for the evening for me. More often than not, Stjärnrök's what I say, I think. And I think tonight is no different to the others. So, we've had a couple come in there. Oh, wow. All right, Jake. Yeah, that's interesting. I'll let Angela know, by the way. I'll say, we had this gentleman that came to join us, wasn't keen on smoky whiskey before, seemed to enjoy some of the others quite well. But the smoky one was his favourite. I think that's awesome. Yeah. Interesting if that's, favourite because you were surprised, or favourite because that is the one that you enjoyed the most, or whatever it is. If you feel like it, please do let us know. Curious to see. We had something from Raf as well. Mac, one of your discoveries tonight. Never tried this before. Never felt so much. The bananas definitely worth a buy. This is, and as I said at the beginning, that's the entry into it. That's the most competitively priced bottle that we have, and I think it's a damn fine drinker. I think this is designed to be versatile. So if somebody wanted to, make cocktails or whatever and do whatever they want with it, you buy the bottle, you can do what you like. It's designed to sort of be versatile with it. But I drink that neat. I have it as it is. Add a drop of water to it if you like. On that note, while we might have some other comments come in, I'll just say about the way to drink whiskey is one of the philosophies I subscribe to, most important whiskey philosophies at least, is that there is only one way to drink whiskey, and that is however you damn well please. If you want to add a drop of water, if you want to add a splash, if you want to put it in a cocktail, if you want, and don't wince, but if you want to add Coca-Cola to something, fill your boots. If you've bought that bottle, you know, and you want to enjoy your drink, enjoy your life. If you enjoy adding Coca-Cola to something, do it. And I know that's sacrilegious to some, but I would say if you enjoy doing something, just do it. If you go around a friend's house, however, and they pour something, they, you know, got some, you know, 20-year-old scotch of this, or an interesting, you know, world whiskey of something else, and before they've even had a sip of it, they're, you know, they're filling the glass up with, you know, Coke or lemonade or something. That, I don't know if that doesn't sound like good form to me. That doesn't sound like a good sort of drinking etiquette with your buddies. But if you own that bottle, do what you please. That's it, and I firmly believe it. Great. Well, if we haven't got anything else coming in, I'll say thank you to everyone that's joined. As a quick recap, if you want to buy a bottle of Stjärnrök, anyone, from MACKMYRA.com, you put the code STARSMOKE in. Once you go through at some point in the purchasing process, put that in, you'll be able to get 40% off of one of the core range bottles that we've tried as well. And I'll say thank you to everyone that's joined. And also, as I said at the beginning, you know, up here on my own, I've usually got Mickey or a colleague or a guest or something here to sort of bounce off a little bit. So I hope this wasn't sort of too monologue-y and coming at you. I really do appreciate everybody that commented and joined and joined in, and anyone that just wanted to sit at home and wasn't fussed about doing it. Thank you so much anyway for being here and being part of it with us all, and I hope to see everyone again. As this is the Christmas show, because it's our closest one to December. I'll say, you know, Merry Christmas, you know, Happy New Year, Happy Holidays, whatever it is to anyone that's come to join. I hope that everyone has a good and safe and enjoyable sort of festive season. And I'll say thanks very much to Carl in the background for Carl doing what you do, on point with the pictures all the time. Really like it, mate, and with the comments as well. Thank you very much. And if I happen to have any colleagues of mine watching that are on leave, loved working with you this year. Looking forward to getting back together and working as a team again come January. And yeah, and a comment here from Raf. So thank you for the evening, MACKMYRA. On top of my whiskey bears. Oh, that's what a lovely thing to say. That's wonderful. Thanks so much. Glad to be part of that journey. And James Niak. Who else do we have? I'm so sorry if I haven't mentioned anyone else there by name, but thank you so much everyone that has joined in. Have a look at mackmyra.co.uk. Even if you're not going to buy one of those bottles with the codes, have a look and see what other things we've got. We've got loads of like blog posts and history of this and history of that. If there's anything that I've said tonight that you found remotely interesting, please go back and have a look at our website, and you can see things in a lot more detail about how everything began and the different stages of this, and a bit more information about the Gravity Distillery as well. So yeah, I think I'll wrap it up there and just say again, thank you so much for everyone that joined. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year. Hope everyone enjoys themselves over the next few weeks, and you know, be well, be safe, and hopefully see you guys again soon. So, skål. Cheers.